And howdy, 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 everyone. Let's get a couple things set up back here behind the scenes, and we'll get ready to get our show on the road. Give me just a couple seconds here. Should be a good one. Hope you all can hear me okay. If you can, just go ahead and check in with the chat. I want to make sure that's working. And then we will start the show. Let me check. I'm not seeing the chat updating, so let me double check on the live streaming window. I'm not seeing this rolling right now. Okay, well, let's see. I'm gonna give me just a second to. Oh, looks like we have takeoff. All right, sweet. All right, let's get the show on the road. Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to the ComicBase live stream. This is the special Halloween edition. We'll be talking about some latest ComicBase news, some industry news, just a little bit, and then getting on to the grim and ghastly story of EC Comics. And there is actually a surprise ending to this one, and a moral even. It's just like an EC comic itself. But anyway, let's start off with just a little round of saying hi to everyone. Okay, John says we're here. Let's also get the chat rolling in here. Okay, want to make sure. Yep, excellent. That is rolling. Okay, cool. All right, man. Let's start out with just the basic news on the whole thing to start with. So, we are getting awfully close to the next version of ComicBase. You guys might remember that a year ago, right about this time, I was, people were asking, hey, when's the next version of ComicBase going to be out? I'd been working for 4 years doing ComicBase 2020. And I was like, well, I can't tell you exactly, but I do plan to be eating my Halloween candy in peace this year. And so it was, I want to say like the 28th or 29th when we finally shipped ComicBase 2020, which is going to mark our 1-year anniversary of the new platform, the new database and everything. I'm really happy about that. Also means that we're going to be getting ready to be getting rid of support for 2017 content updates, because as you guys probably know, ComicBase comes with a 1-year update for all your software with both the content and the program during that year. This lets us, let's just do two things. One thing is it lets us give you all the new stuff, whether it's a program or features all in one, kind of easy to manage package. But the other thing it lets us do is it lets us kind of obsolete stuff that's more than a year old. So I think this week or next is going to be the last time we'll be pushing a ComicBase 2017 content update, because everyone with a ComicBase 2017 subscription should have their subscription expired by now. So that's going to help our guys on the back end quite a bit, and kind of paves the way for the next folks, going forward. And then we should be looking forward to the new release of the new stuff. So just to let you know that that's coming up. There'll be a couple other changes as well. Just to some platform stuff that we'll keep you updated on, but more on that a little later on. A couple new things. If you download the very latest copy of ComicBase, so just the interim build. So if you just went down to registrations and download it now, one little thing we added in. It's a little tweak. You can do it yourself if you have a mind to, or you can just let the update do it for you. Is there are now automatically added a binding type of ebook available for all the books, and there are also digital variants available for both comics and magazines. What these are for is to allow you to have a way of tracking books that have only ever come out in ebook format. So especially with technical books, there's going to be a pretty wide range of books that really never ship in paper form. So you have a way to track that you spent X amount of money on, that you've got the book and so forth. And of course you can always just drag the ebook or the PDF or whatever else right onto the issue itself, and then have that link straight in. So as you're looking in ComicBase at your book collection or your magazine collection or whatever else, you can just click and go straight to the digital format of what you're doing. That's a feature that's been in there for a while. Anyway, just to let you know that that's a new thing. Look forward to your comments on that going forward. It does get us in kind of a weird situation in terms of like that the media type is, it feels a little bit almost redundant with the digital thing, but we're seeing more and more that there are comic books that only ever appear in digital form, as well as ebooks, and so we need to have a way to let people track those, and so that's what we're doing. All right, other things that are happening. I have a serious question for all of you about auto-updating, and I really want to know your opinion on this. I don't know if there's a way in YouTube to hold a poll. If there is, I didn't have time to check it out before showtime, but please respond in the comments what you think about this one. We've got the ability in the next version of ComicBase to have updates be much more automatic. So just when you launch the program, it says, oh, hey, there's a new version available. It downloads it in just a moment or two, and you just click one button to update the whole thing, and your program is ready to go. It's a much less, I wouldn't call it a traumatic, process to update your database, your data right now, or the program right now. But it's certainly a few steps more involved. You have to quit the old thing, launch the new thing, click, click, click. Now it's more like updating like a web browser kind of deal, where it's one or two clicks and you've got the latest version of everything you're doing. Well, one thing we're giving serious thought to is making it so when ComicBase 2021 comes out, of having that also be an auto update. So in other words, right now you're running ComicBase 20.0.3. Blah blah blah, right? What we're thinking will happen is if you've got a valid ComicBase 2021 serial number, which you will have if you have a current subscription, so as long as your update subscription is current, you'll automatically get given a ComicBase 2021 serial number in your account. When that happens, and if you're still running ComicBase 2020, it'll say, hey, there's a new update available to ComicBase 2021, and it, give you a little brief on what's new and all the cool new stuff, and then have it just automatically download you the new version. You run that one, and then you're in the new future. You don't have to uninstall and reinstall and do all the other things you typically have to do moving from version to version. We're thinking of making that an auto update, and honestly, part of the reason we're thinking of making an auto update as opposed to a manual update really has to do with that whole digital and ebook variants that we just put out, in that we can't push any new ebooks or digital comic variants. We can't push them out as part of a content update until everyone has those in their database. And everyone won't have them in their database unless everyone downloading a content update is running the new stuff. So in order to make that work really smoothly, we're thinking, well, maybe we can just make it so that when ComicBase 2021 comes out, that you automatically get the ComicBase 2021, which will then automatically do all the database updating it needs to do, and everything should work pretty smoothly. If that's strikes you is too intrusive, or if one way or another you feel like you'd have a problem with that, or you have a concern, let us know in the comments, or write us at support@comicbase.com. I'd really like to know before we do this, because it is something new for us. We haven't automatically updated people between versions. It's always been something we say, hey, we try to make as much news as we can on the newsletter. Hey, go to your account, go to registrations, download the new version, it'll be great, blah, blah, blah. But we've never actually just made that part of the automatic update cycle. So let us know, and I really want to hear what you have to say. Okay, other news. Actually, one other final question. Any of you folks out there who have a point-of-sale business, a bricks and mortar, I want to know, are you interested in Shopify integration? Sorry, it's going to close this other window here because it's distracting me because I'm seeing a little image of myself off the corner of my eye, so I keep on doing that. Are you interested in having Shopify integration? In other words, this is something where ComicBase has the ability to have like a basic point of sale built into it. That's the point of sale terminal, but there's no direct integration with something where if you have a clicks and mortar kind of operation, where people might come into your store and buy comics, and you want to keep that inventory updated with your ComicBase. That is something that we're interested in potentially supporting. There is a fair amount of work involved for us on that one. And so I would like to know if you do have a clicks and mortar operation for you. Is this something you're interested in? And honestly, is it something you might be willing to pay a little bit more for? Because it is going to be a lot of extra support for us, and a lot of extra work to keep that up and running and so forth for a relatively few number of customers. I mean, it isn't that you're not important to us. I think it would be really cool to make that happen, but it is something that we've got to be able to say, hey, can we essentially pay the staff and time it's going to require to keep that all up and running if we take that one on as part of our mission. So let us know. And again, that's another thing where if you want to send a note to either just me directly at pbickford@humancomputing.com, or just support at comicbase.com. Also, or just put it in the comments. Curious to know what you guys think. And if you're using any other kind of point of sale system for your store that might have some kind of integration point that we could latch onto, and that's more important to you, let us know that too. All right. And I think, okay, 2 more news items. News item number 1, and I gotta pull this one up on the other screen because it's just too beautiful. Let me see if I can find. Unfortunately, I was doing a lot of research for this one, so I have a lot of open foo on my desktop. So it might take me just a second to find this. Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay, I'm gonna throw this up on the other screen here. Hopefully you guys can all see this. Gonna cut over to there. And okay, so you guys may have heard about the New Warriors. If you haven't heard about it, New Warriors is a Marvel property. It's it's a superhero group of really second and third tier heroes. It had a couple runs during during previous decades, and a guy named Daniel Kibblesmith, who's currently I think writing Loki, decided he wanted to have a whack at it, but he was going to go fully modern with the whole thing, and he was going to have the old New Warriors act as mentors for a bold new bunch of characters that he was going to introduce that were going to be just timeless. And those include, and let's see if we've got any updates on the whole thing. Yes, those include Snowflake. Snowflake is a twin with Safe Space, which is those are these characters over there. Safe Space has the ability to force project, but only when he's defending others. Snowflake has the ability, and Snowflake is a non-binary, whatever. I mean, LGBTQIA LMNOP character. They're apparently twins, but nobody looked and saw who was who. Snowflake apparently has the ability to have ice crystals, and they turn them into weapons. It's awesome. And Snowflake's preferred pronouns are they and them, so who knows. The character in the front here is called Trailblazer. She's kind of like a Dora the Explorer, except she's a little heavy, and she has a magic backpack that allows her to do something. This guy right here is called Screen Time. He got exposed to internet gas that makes it so he's plugged into the internet all the time. Which is very exciting. And then the vampire goth kid in the back there is called B Negative, and it's basically a goth vampire, kid. Anyway, so this made a lot of news when this was announced. It was going to be a 5-issue miniseries. It eventually became a graphic novel instead of a miniseries, and it was due to ship yesterday, and it didn't show up. So it's kind of funny because this is one of those weird stories that broke out across the norms. All got this news as well, more or less under the impression that the comics world had lost its ever loving mind. Anyway, so they decided. I don't know. There's been no comment from Marvel or Amazon or B. Dalton or whoever. I'm sorry, not B. Dalton. Barnes and Noble, to say what happened to the New Warriors graphic novel. It seems as if it's been disappeared for the moment. Stay tuned. And I guess the headline here, I was just looking for the video reel where they're introducing it. Worth checking out on YouTube if you want to check out the New Warriors, because it's something special. Anyway, so that's the news on there. So if you're breathlessly waiting for the New Warriors, sorry guys, you're gonna have to wait just a little bit longer or forever, because apparently it's not happening just at the moment. Let me take a quick check of the chat. Okay, Greg says hi. Prior meme went overtime. Greg says, if there's no Mac download for the update, will it be auto backup your database before it happens, just to see how I cover your butt? Not more than usual. It doesn't really. This is really an automatic update for the program is the real thing that we're worried about on this one. it's you know, the database, we're kind of always, you know, whenever we push little updates, we're kind of always making little tweaks, you know, like, oh, hey, we added a variant. We don't save a special copy of your backup. I mean, you still got your last backup from when you were using things. I don't think we've ever seen anything where, you know, adding a couple of these fields ever messed up anyone's database. But there isn't a particular, there isn't like an extra copy of the backup, because it isn't the kind of transition that we did like between 2017 and 2020, where in 2017, we did make a safety copy of your old stuff, and we kind of set everything aside because it was a wildly different database format, and we were copying millions of records into the other thing. This isn't that kind of deal. This is like a little patch-up tweak kind of deal where we add a couple things. But the program itself would get, you know, updated. Okay, John says, not a big deal if I update the program. Okay. Rob says auto update, yes. Got a couple other votes for auto update, yes. Okay, so far, yeah, Agent DeCamp says, sorry, this looks awful. I hope you're talking about the New Warriors. Okay, and let's see. Oh, yes, Brian Gwinner points out, the trailer on YouTube received 5.4 thousand likes and 267,000 downvotes, which I guess if you're all hip to the internet stuff, they call that being ratioed, and oh man, what a ratio. That's, yeah, special doesn't describe it. That is absolutely true. Okay, so, anyway, I had one other news item, which is to say, let me find it. Science. Nope, not it. Sorry about this, guys. I'm going to need to go to the other screen for just a second. Excuse me while I hunt around. Okay. Oh my goodness. See, the problem is you can't just randomly type things on your own desktop and have the appropriate thing pop up. So I'm trying. Oh man, I really want to find this too. Give me just a second. Oh, here we go. Excellent. All right. A scientific movie has determined the scariest, the scientific studies determined the scariest movie ever. So I want to do this as a Halloween show and talk about, like, you know, just our favorite spooky things. And, you know, all of us, we're all pop culture guys. And so, you know, movies and other video games and stuff, like, they're obviously going to enter the discussion. But I thought it was really interesting that somebody actually went out and tried to figure out what is the scariest thing that ever happened. And they did this by getting a whole bunch of folks in, and they had them watch 100 hours of scary movies. So the broadband choices tracked the heart rates of 50 people of different ages, watched 100 hours of scary movies, and they found a baseline heart rate for everybody, and then they try to figure out what movies caused their heart rate to jump the most on average, and also when you had a jump scare, what was the scariest moment overall. Anyway, so the movie scary movie, and I gotta say, I've never seen this movie, is a movie called Sinister. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger so it's a little easier to see. Movie called Sinister. Ethan Hawke, so forth. Average heart rate on this guy, let me see if I can find it. Yes, the resting BPM, 65 beats per minute. The highest spike, double that, 131 beats per minute. Difference of 32 beats per minute on average throughout the movie. So this thing messed people up. Beyond that, the movies that kind of crawl around inside my brain, you know, just from being scared as a kid, were not, for the most part, did not make the list. The movie is hugely dominated by relatively recent horror movies. So we have Insidious, The Conjuring, Hereditary, Paranormal Activity. I did see that. That was scary. It Follows, I don't get that. I didn't find it scary at all. Conjuring 2, Babadook. Babadook had some good jump scares. The Descent, The Visit. Yeah, The Visit was weird. That I'm going to give that one up. And then biggest jump scares by heart rate. We had Insidious, Sinister, The Exorcist 3. And I wish I could remember what the jump scare was in Exorcist 3. The Conjuring and The Descent. Others that, you know, kind of round out the list here: The Ring, A Quiet Place, Nightmare on Elm Street. That's about the only classic. I guess Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre on the list. 28 Days Later, The Exorcist. Okay, all right. So we have some classics in the bottom, you know, bottom tier here. Hush, It, and Scream. And then you've got some of the other classics on the, or modern classics on the, rounding out the whole thing. I thought this was interesting. Be curious in the comments what you guys thought was your scariest movie, and if it hasn't made the the list yet, we'd still do have a couple days before Halloween, so there's time to get in on the action. All right, so let's check the chat one more time, and then let's get on to the main feature. Exorcist for me. Let's see. Oh, Greg says, don't think Diamond solicited anything other than the 3 issues of New Warriors floppies and nothing on Comixology. I think Diamond solicited the floppies and then they canceled. I'm not sure if it was an official cancel, but it definitely is nowhere on anyone's radar anymore. It's coming out as a ongoing series and all. Scariest movies that Pauly Shore could make another one. Or Agent says Future State. Legend of Hell House. Don't know that one. Never heard of Sinister. Okay, and all right, cool. All right, so let me go back to myself here for just a minute. All right, so forgive me, guys. I did not have enough time to make this really super slick in terms of presentation on the whole thing, because this is one of those things, excuse me as I rearrange a bunch of windows so I can kind of keep my eyes a little bit on the camera here, a little bit, while manipulating something. I typically do this by hitting little macros on a switcher by my fingertips here, but I got done prepping for this whole thing like about 20 minutes before showtime, so I don't have time to make the switching really great, so warning, what you're about to see is not the slickest thing you will ever see. But I want to talk about, like I say, things that scare me. So Halloween it's a really interesting holiday. It's all the other holidays we've got on the year are like, there are either things like, there's pride in your heritage, of one sort or another, 4th of July, Columbus Day, etc. You've got things like Thanksgiving, which is a very poetic and very American holiday, which is just, about, hey, take a day and be thankful about stuff. You've got religious holidays like Christmas and Easter and such. You've got the holiday of love, with Valentine's Day. And then you've got Halloween, which is it's a holiday which it comes out of an old pagan holiday, which in typical form was co-opted by early Christians, eventually got sort of sanctified into the day that follows, really, is All Saints Day, but it's really, in the modern sense, it's a time to celebrate being a little bit scared. And that's one of the things I kind of like, all the ghouls and skeletons and monsters and all the other stuff like that. And I really loved it as a kid. I love the imagery on the whole thing. I do remember like being really small when you dress up and like, oh, I'm a ghost, put a sheet on or whatever the thing was. And you want to be spooky, but not too spooky, because one of the big challenges, that you have is certainly as a boy in particular. I can't speak of what it's like to be a young girl, but as a young boy, it's like one of the main things you have to do as you get older is you have to learn how to be brave. And that's why, bit by bit, it starts out with just little things like, Harryhausen movies with animated skeletons fighting and stuff like that, and it eventually gets up to, Texas Chainsaw Massacre or whatever else. But you're trying to kind of teach yourself to, like, take a scare and keep going, and it is really part of, like, a little mental thing where, like, you're just trying to, it's just like getting on the scarier roller coaster or the faster ride or driving your car super fast, where else you're constantly trying to scare yourself just a little bit so you kind of teach yourself to be brave. So I'm sitting there thinking, all right, I'm 53 now, man, it's Halloween, what am I going to talk about? And I thought, well, okay, so I got myself a glass of scotch, got a cigar, I'm out on the back deck, just sort of thinking about what I'm going to talk about on the show. And I thought, well, all right, Bigford, what scares you? And I'm thinking, like, I don't know, man, there's not a lot that, like, scares me anymore. There's a fair number of things that fill me with a sense of creeping dread, but in terms of scares you, I mean, all the things that, when you're a little kid, it was pretty easy, because all it takes is something that's bigger than you, that can overpower you, that can, like, rip you to shreds and do all the stuff like that. And as an adult, I'm sitting there thinking, well, I don't know, I'm bigger, I'm not the biggest guy on the block, but, as they say, it's like, God made man and Colonel Colt made us equal. I'm sitting there, and for modern horror, I'm thinking the table stakes are, well, can it stop a bullet? Because, once you sit there and say, all right, this guy might be bigger than me, but, I bet you he ain't bulletproof. Well, then suddenly the list of things that can terrify you if you see him coming goes way down. And same thing goes for other things. I mean, we have, the ability to call police. We have the ability to do all sorts of other things and round up neighbors and friends and as adults to marshal things that it seems really beyond you as a little kid that get under you. And honestly, the things like just ghosts and bump in the night, they never really, got to me that much. But I did actually think of something in the end that does scare me. And I'll tell you at the end, but by way of getting there, I want to tell you about my favorite spooky thing. My favorite spooky thing of all time is EC Comics. So this is the guys right here. These are the guys who brought you Tales from the Crypt. Now, I am not bringing out my ancient copies from the 1950s of Tales from the Crypt because they're fragile as anything at this point. I never bought amazing copies of them anyway. And, it's one of those things where, like, after 7 years, the paper gets very, degraded and so forth. I love that Dark Horse and any number of other people have reprinted these books in modern formats so that we can actually afford to see, the beautiful, beautiful illustration work and see them in all their absolute splendor without, risking, like, a $1,000 comic book in the process. But anyway, the EC Comics, the Tales from the Crypt, were absolutely, that is at the heart of what I love in terms of both comics and spooky stuff, because it was just edgy enough that you could kind of take the scare. It was, usually, there's usually the twist ending or the moral at the end or whatever else, so it kind of gave you some sort of wash down the spooky with at the whole end of the whole day. But at the same time, it was just fiendish, some of the stories that came up in the whole thing, and they were just so much fun. Sitting in a tent in your backyard, reading that kind of stuff, along with things like Tomb of Dracula and so forth, as a little kid by flashlight. That it doesn't get any better than that. Just being a kid. So, where did EC Comics come from? Well, EC Comics has the coolest story, and I swear to God, if someone doesn't make a movie out of this, I would back it myself or try to produce it or something, because it's just a cool tale. So it all starts with a guy named MC Ginsberg. You say, MC Ginsberg, who the heck is that? Well, we know him as Max Gaines. He used to be a former teacher, a haberdasher, and he later became a salesman for Eastern Color Publishing, which is an early printer of Sunday comic strips. Most printing, as you guys probably know, is black and white. It's, certainly in the old days, very much black and white, because to print color takes four color plates. It's very expensive, especially on things like newspapers, and so very rare for, magazines and newspapers until fairly recently to print color much. The one thing they would print is the color, they'd print in color would be the Sunday color comic supplements. Anyway, one day, while schlepping around New York, Max had an idea, and he went and he said, all right, I'll bet you if I could make up some tabloid bound together, stapled together copies of Sunday paper strips, put them together, and we'll use them as a promotional item for Procter & Gamble. So, you send off 5 cents and a coupon from your latest box of toothpaste, and we'll send you one of these special color, color-bound things of the Sunday Funnies. You could say, come on, guys, we'll sell 1 million of these things. Brought the thing up to his boss, a guy named Harry L. Wildenberg. And yes, I am going to look at notes on this one, because there's a lot of names, and I want to get them right. Brought the thing up to Harry L. Wildenberg. And by the way, depending on, who you hear the story from, it was either Harry's brilliant idea or it was Max's. I'm going to stick with Max. As far as I'm concerned, that's canon. That said, if you're, a relative of Harry L. Wildenberg's and you know the story better than I do, I'm open to being wrong on whose idea it was. But someone had the idea. And Procter & Gamble originally turned them down, but eventually they got the go-ahead to give it a shot. And he came up with a thing called Funnies on Parade, which is the first graphic I'm going to flip to right here so you can get my mug off the screen right there. I'm sorry. Funnies on Parade, which then later on became Famous Funnies. Funnies on Parade was a free promo copy. They ran 10,000 copies of it, and yeah, it was one of those things that it was like 5 cents if you send in your coupon from the back of the Procter and Gamble box of toothpaste. Famous Funnies, a Carnival of Comics. That's the picture you're looking at right now. That later became it's another just bound together set of reprints of comic books. That later became Famous Funnies. You might have heard of that series. That is what people consider to be the first American comic book by and large. So anyway, back and then later on in 1935, we have New Fun Comics. Number one, it's the first non-reprint comic book in American history. And as you guys might imagine, New Fun Comics became More Fun Comics. And More Fun Comics gave us things like the Spectre and so forth. And then things were off to the races. In 1938, Gaines and a guy named Jack Leibowitz formed a company called All American Productions. Now, Leibowitz is an interesting dude as well. He co-owned a thing called National Periodical Publications with a guy named Harry Donenfeld. Now, at this point, if you're an old comics geek, these names should start to be sounding a little bit familiar. So Harry Donenfeld at National Publications teamed up with All American Publications because they had rotating ownership of the whole thing, and for a number of years, especially at the beginning, they would share advertising and publication of the characters and so forth. All American Comics gave us the Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, a guy named William Moulton Marston. I'm sorry, I think he was going by William Marston. An industrial psychologist of all things, came up with the idea of a Amazon woman who with a lasso that she would use to tie up men and force them to tell the truth. This guy was an industrial psychologist, also the same guy who came up with, oh good lord, what is the name of that program? 4 letters. I'll think of it. But it's a program that's still used in industrial psychology to the day, although they do not talk about the Wonder Woman connection. DISC training, DISC, which if you are in an organizational standpoint, if you're ever in management, you might have been given this you might have been asked to go to the company's DISC training. The DISC stands for, originally it stands for Dominance, influence. The S was originally for submissiveness. I think they call it stability now because they don't want to, say, oh look, you rate really high in submissiveness because that sounds terrible. And then the C is for compliance. So the idea in industrial psychology is that those were the 4 personality factors that you could observe in other people you might be doing a deal with. And if you knew how they rated along those different things, you'd come up with 17 different, if you were high in one or the others and so forth, you come up with about 17 different kind of archetypical personality traits of the people you're dealing with. And then if you kind of know what levers those guys do, then you'd know how to make deals with them better. I actually went to DISC training once at a consulting company I was in, and astonishingly for me because it was one of the only things I ever did there that I knew the secret origin of this entire thing, where it started with the guy who invented Wonder Woman. It stunningly, though, wound up not being complete BS as a technique. You learn things like if this guy is really high in his influencing factor, for instance, there are certain ways you would talk to him that would, people who are really high in influence, for instance, are really carried along by the idea of something. This actually is pretty close to where I am, where I'll get really caught up into, hey, have you considered the many wonderful advantages of doing this great new idea I have? Someone who's very high in dominance, on the other hand, is like, no, I got to be the alpha male in the room or the alpha female in the room. It's like, I want it short and to the point, make your pitches very, succinct. Do not waste my time. I need to own this whole thing. Skip straight to the money line on the slides and so forth. And and so forth, and there's different mixes and matches of the whole thing. But if you actually would pitch your deals to people based on where they were in the organization and what sort of personality types they were exhibiting, and everything, we wound up being much more successful. So shocked by that. Anyway, back off Wonder Woman. So Back at All American, he brought in Hawkman, All Star Comics, and so forth. 1944, Gaines went and sold off his part of All American Publishing to DC. So DC then, if you remember DC Comics from that era, they used to say a National Periodicals publication, then it eventually became DC Comics. Gaines then started a new thing called EC Comics, which EC originally stood for Educational Comics. You know, it still had the same logo, just a circle with EC on it, but they would do things like picture stories from the Bible or picture stories from science, and they were going to enlighten people and make them so that they were, you know, using comics to reach out to kids and teach them important lessons about life. So that was a pretty good venture. It sounded great, at least. He made some money off selling off his stake on all the superheroes did national, the whole thing. But by 1947, the new comics were really struggling. The comic stories from the Bible were selling for 65 cents. They were, they were a hard sell to people. You know, your parents might buy you one, for Sunday school or whatever else, but you weren't going to go down to the candy store and buy it yourself. And honestly, he was trying anything he could to kind of keep everything working. He did Tip Top Comics and a bunch of funny animal comics, but sales were starting to go to heck. And then, 1947, beautiful fall day, tragedy strikes. He's out boating. He gets invited to go out boating with a friend. A guy named, on Lake Placid, a guy named Sam Irwin invites them to take out on his Chris Craft. And then this happens. Let me go to the still. Boom. There we are. They're basically riding alongside. They've got Max's daughter, his 20-year-old daughter, is swimming alongside the boat. They're pacing alongside them in their Chris Craft. They've got a 9-year-old son of his friend in the back of the boat, and they've got another friend swimming alongside Gaines's daughter. When out of nowhere, across the lake, a lady, she's actually the daughter of the local judge, comes screaming in on her motorboat, crashes into their boat, hits them just ahead of midship size, goes straight over the boat, grabs, it sends Gaines flying into the water. His friend Sam Irwin gets snarled up in the propeller, was killed virtually instantly in a very grisly fashion. And then afterwards, the kid apparently, the little 9-year-old boy, escaped with a bump on the head, and the two girls in the water, saw the boat coming, and so they were able to get out of the way in time. But Gaines's body was not found. They had an aerial search. They wound up dragging the lake, and about 5 the next day, they found Gaines's body, and that was it. It was all over for him. So that was not, not great. And yes, here was the there were, and here's the daughter of the local judge who did them in. Well, so Max Gaines exits our story at this point, and it leaves a guy named William Gaines, kind of a nebbish, Jewish kid from Brooklyn who wants to become a chemistry teacher. He enters the story. He gets, suddenly is in control of his dad's, failing comics, publishing company. So, he wants to do what he can. His marriage at that point, his first marriage, he just announced the same month, is over to his first wife. And it's time to buckle down and try to put some comic books out. So he goes and forms EC Comics, which is now Entertaining Comics. And what he's going to do is, well, basically what everyone was doing at that point, copy anything that's selling. And so he came out with things like saddle romances and westerns and gunfighters and so forth. It was just whatever was moving product, he was going to try it. And he floundered around with that for a couple of years, but one thing he noticed, because everyone's cribbing from everyone at this point, 1947, there was a one-shot comic that came out. I want to say it was IW Publications, but it was a comic called Eerie, which was generally considered the first horror comic. It was ghouls and mummified bodies and mangled corpses and so forth. It's the first super scary comic book out there. Lev Gleason got into the game and so forth, and Gaines looking around for the next best thing says, hey, maybe we take some of these other things and change them to something else. So they were publishing a lot of crime books at the time, and he decided that his Crime Patrol comic at that point was suddenly going to become Crypt of Terror. And then at the same time, Tales from the Crypt began. Gunfighter became, Crypt of Terror became Tales from the Crypt a little bit later on. In between that, Gunfighter became Haunt of Fear, and War Against Crime became Vault of Horror. And it's the formula that we all know. It's like you've got a ghoul or an old witch or a vault keeper or so forth who introduces a bunch of anthology stories, which, have got a typical kind of secret surprise ending, or something where like the bad guy gets his comeuppance in a horrific and ghoulish way and so forth. And then of course the pièce de résistance, Tales from the Crypt. After 4 issues, I think it was 4 issues, or maybe 3 issues, what would have been Crypt of Terror number 20 suddenly becomes Tales from the Crypt. So that's where the whole thing just becomes an absolute legend. So the kids are eating this stuff up. I love this stuff. Now, one thing it really helped with is when Gaines inherited his parents' company, he also inherited a guy named Al Feldstein as an editor, who was an absolute triple threat. I mean, he was an editor, he was a writer, he was an artist. He was really good at his job. And there's a picture of those two together back in the day, when things are going well. Basically what happened is Bill Gaines would, read every pulp novel, every movie, everything he could see, and he said, I got an idea for a story, guys. And then they would try to, pitch whatever the whole thing is. Al Feldstein would, kind of take it from there, write up a script, and he'd pass it on to a bunch of very, very talented artists that they had on staff. People like, Graham Ingalls, Jack Davis, and so forth. It's just fabulous, fabulous folks. Joe Orlando, Jack Kamen, and so forth. And then later on, some people, because they were doing the terror books, of course, but they also got involved with a lot of like science fiction and things like that, because sci-fi was huge at the time. They they published a bunch of sci-fi books as well, and those were working very well. Matter of fact, one of the things that they did, this is kind of a fun story, is they ran, I want to say it was in, oh man, I'm gonna get the title wrong. It was Amazing Science Fiction. Anyway, in one of their books, they went and they ripped off the first 2 issues of first 2 stories from Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles, which had just been published a couple years earlier. Anyway, Ray Bradbury, who my personal favorite sci-fi author of all time, the gent on the left there, he was really cool about it. What he did is he said, "Hey man, I really enjoyed reading your adaptation of my Martian Chronicles in your latest book there, and I noticed, however, that I must have neglected, you neglected to send me, a copy of my royalty check. So here's no problem. Here's a duplicate invoice for you. If you could pay it at your soonest convenience, that'd be really good of you." Anyway, they paid it, and then they started actually working with them legitimately, and things were kind of off to the races at that point. By 1952, everything was firing on all cylinders, and things are going really good for these guys. They're absolutely tearing up the sales charts. They're selling millions of copies of some of the stuff, all in all. And things are going pretty awesome. And honestly, if you get a hold of these things, I highly recommend the entire Bloody line. It just, there wasn't a bad thing they were doing in any of the genres as far as I'm concerned. Meanwhile, on the other hand, the villain is about to enter the story. The villain's a guy named Frederick Wortham. This gentleman over here. So Frederick Wortham, born in Germany, in I want to say 1914, might be somewhere in there, but old German psychologist. He was running a clinic in Brooklyn, and I gotta get some of these details because they're awesome. Oh, where are we at here? Oh, yes, here we are. Yeah, he was running a clinic in Brooklyn called the Lafargue Clinic. It's named after the French political activist Paul Lafargue, who is involved with the Paris Commune. If you guys are fans of the 80s new wave band The Communards, that's where they are named after. But they were an agitation group, caused all sorts of problems back in the day. And Paul Lafargue, by the way, was also married to Laura Marx, and that made him the son-in-law of, yes, that one great Karl Marx. Karl used to send him around, and basically, even though he was a medical doctor, he apparently was no bloody good at his profession because he never did anything with it. Instead, he spent all his time politically agitating for communism, and so he was sent hither and yon to do his thing. Interestingly, Frederick Wortham, our villain of the story, apparently a big fan of Lafargue, actually named his clinic after it. Never saw definitive answer as to why, but I can only assume that he was a fan. Anyway, Frederick Wortham, in 1948, was getting very interested. He did expert testimony in things like the Albert Fish murder and stuff. He deals with clinical criminal psychology the whole time, and in particular later on, juvenile delinquency. He started publishing a series in Collier's magazine called Horror in the Nursery in 1948, where he started taking on comic books, which were getting to be a really big thing in American life at that point. Everyone read them, especially the new crime comic books that were, crime and horror and mystery comic books. He published Wertham published the Psychopathy of comic books in May 1948. These same views, he later released them in the Journal of Psychotherapy and in the Saturday Review of Literature in an article entitled "The Comics Very Funny." And by the way, I'll cite some sources for everything I'm giving you here in the show notes later on. This stuff, as far as I'm concerned, is just fascinating reading, so I hope you don't mind if I go on about it just a little bit. But his whole idea, though, is that the kids were reading comic books, and this is all leading them directly to become obsessed with sex and go straight into crime. At this point, people were starting to get really worked up about the encroaching, problem of juvenile delinquency. It was going to be a real concern in American life after the war. And you also had, in this whole same background, worries about organized crime and communists. In let's see, I'll get to the Rosenbergs in a bit here, but we dropped the bomb to end the war, and this was our superpower as a nation. It was the one thing that made it so no one was going to mess with us for a number of years. But at the same time, everyone desperately wanted peace and quiet after the war, but everything in life had been hugely disrupted on any kind of level. And so everyone's trying desperately to get back to some kind of normal, but at the same time, it feels like there's threats coming in from everywhere. 1952, the Ladies' Home Journal started running a series of articles on the threat of comic books authored by Frederick Wortham. Later on that same year, by the way, Mad premiered as a comic book. Remember I was saying that EC was trying a little bit of everything? Well, they also tried humor. At the time, it was just, kind of like dopey humor in comic book format, but we'll come back to Mad a little later on. Later that year, also, EC had gotten around to stealing Ray Bradbury's work without his permission, but that worked out. In 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, were accused of having stolen the atomic bomb secrets, given them to the Russians, and were executed. So yeah, everyone's basically on high alert at this point. And a guy named Herbert Hancock, he was the chief counsel on the subcommittee on juvenile delinquency, reached out to Frederick Wortham, our obsessed with comics psychologist, and said, I'm read your work in the Ladies' Home Journal. I'd like to get in touch, see if you'd like to maybe testify in front of my committee on juvenile delinquency next year. Well, all right. Wortham said, yeah, I'm be happy to do that, but I got a book coming out soon. So could you hold up the hearings a little bit until April or so, and then I'll testify. The book he had that was getting ready to come out was a thing called Seduction of the Innocent, and I'm going to flip over to this one. That's the ad for it in the Ladies' Home Journal, but and I'm gonna show off a little bit here. I have an actual copy. This thing is the hardest to find bloody book on the dang planet. And I was so happy to have tracked down a copy from back in the day. What it is, and let me just leaf through. It's like most books of the day, very little illustration except in the center spread, because again, type is expensive. Type is cheap, prints are expensive. And all these things, of course, were reprinted without the permission of the authors. But basically, he took issue with everything from I don't know if you guys can make out the caption on this one. It says cover of a children's comic book, which of course is a cover of an EC crime comic. The man hanging. He was accusing Superman of being a absolute archetype of Nazi superhumanism. Wortham being essentially a very much a communist devotee. Certainly, the communists were the enemies of the Nazis in early Germany and so forth. But he was certainly on the side where having won the war against the Nazis, he's like, well, we can't have any of these Nazi archetypes in our in our life. He was basically saying Superman is nothing but a Nazi archetype. There's constantly all sorts of people he's beating up that are just the mongrel, nations of the world that, are just the others and so forth. Remember, we just came out of World War II. All this was very fresh in everyone's head. He thought Batman and Robin were gay archetypes. He did not see, the relationship between, Bruce Wayne and his ward is anything innocent whatsoever. He thought it was basically homosexual grooming. And he, of course, thought that Wonder Woman was nothing but, a lesbian archetype. She of the golden lasso that forced men to tell the truth, and also created by the industrial psychologist with a very, very strong, interest in how dominant and or submissive someone was. Other things you've got on here, obsession with, sex in comics, some headlines we've got under here. Where you going on a night like this, Tony? You ain't gonna shoot anybody with that rod, are ya? Which of course is, gangster mall talk, from some crime comic. But the caption on that is an invitation to learning. He's criticizing erotic spanking, etc., etc., etc. And then this is another great one over here, is in Crime Detective, which I believe was a Lev Gleason book. You'll notice that there's a psychologist, tied up in the front of the picture there, which is basically a caricature of the author in a position comic book publishers wish he were in permanently. So, yeah, as far as Wertham was concerned, yeah, he was going to bring the fight to them. It was on. Well, one thing that was going on in the midst of all this stuff, so you've got EC, they're selling comic books, hand over fist. You've got the people of America are getting freaked out about commies and drugs and kids and, and crime and the whole nine yards. And you've got this guy saying that the problem with all of it is kids reading crime comics. Now, of course, most people didn't have TV back then, certainly not in the late 40s. By the mid 1950s, TVs were starting to get very common in American homes. But comics were just everywhere. You saw everyone would have comic books, and they'd be reading them and passing them on to friends and so forth. And so Wertham was able to very credibly say, look, the one thing I've seen with all of my patients that I see who are accused of the most horrendous crimes and murders and and rapes and arson and everything else, they all read comic books. They were just basically crime planning. You hear the same thing later era about video games and so forth. Anyway, but he could say it, and it was true, because everyone read comic books. Therefore, all the criminals read comic books. Well, in the midst of all this, you have the politicians. So what are politicians going to do? Politicians are going to try to make their clients' fears, going to try to address their clients' fears, their constituents' fears. So we already talked about a guy, that Hannock, who is with the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency. But they decided they're going to convene hearings in April of 1954, and they're going to invite Frederick Wortham in to testify on the evils of comic books. But immediately after that, they're also going to invite in the heads of the different comic publishing companies. Now, if you've ever met a corporate head when there's a popular hysteria afoot, you will understand that courage is not a common response. If everyone's really ginned up about a particular thing, usually the people who think that they're going to be seen as being on the right side of it are like, oh, no, let us announce our public responsibility safety statement. And so this used to be, these sorts of things used to be printed in the fronts of comic books about, like, because we care about your children, and we here at Archie Comics will only do the following. And here's our board of psychologists, which, say that everything we do is, squeaky clean and above board and so forth. This was the sort of thing that would run in comics of the day when, in the 1954 or so, when everything was really building to a T. And there's some really great stuff. So I want to read some selections from DC's editorial standards. So DC sent their corporate heads in to testify on comic books, and the corporate lawyers don't know from comic books. They do not know that Superman's a man from Krypton and that, his weakness is kryptonite. They couldn't have told you a thing about that, but they sure were, interested in how do I get these crazy people off of our back, and how do I keep the Senate from passing some kind of weird censorship laws on us and doing things like that. So they came and said, look, guys, here is our editorial policy for Superman DC publications. Number 1, sex. The inclusion of females in stories is specifically discouraged. Women, when used in plot structure, should be secondary in importance and should be drawn realistically without exaggeration of feminine physical qualities. Language. Expressions, sick, having reference to the deity are forbidden. So that's why you say holy moly. You do not say dear God or anything like that. Heroes and other good persons must be must use basically good English, though some slang or other colloquialism may be judiciously employed. Poor grammar is used only by crooks and villains, and not always by them. Because, yeah, I mean, you don't want to imply that everyone who speaks bad English is a crook. Bloodshed. Characters, even villains, should never be shown bleeding. No character should be shown being stabbed or shot or otherwise assaulted, so that the sanguinary result is visible. Acts of mayhem are specifically forbidden. The picturization of dead bodies is forbidden. Torture. The use of chains, whips, or other devices is forbidden. And of course, at that point, I'm thinking, well, I guess there goes the cartoon, episode of our last vacation. Kidding. Kidnapping, killing, crime, etc., etc., etc. It goes on and on. Of DC's corporate mission statement of how they were going to never do anything bad. Well, they invited William Gaines to testify. He followed Wertham directly afterwards. And wow, oh wow, oh wow. The testimony he gave was not great. Now, you might have noticed that Bill Gaines, a little bit of a heavy, guy, and, a heavy office working guy, works many hours. He probably smokes too much. He doesn't exercise. He doesn't, get a chance to eat properly and so forth. He always struggled with his weight. And so in the 1950s, he was not only, getting interested in psychotherapy, which also became a series of comics later on, psychoanalysis, but he also was hopped up on diet pills, which, if you guys remember the good old days, diet pills back in the 50s were amphetamines. So, yeah, it was not even like, if you guys recall the later AIDS, AYDS, which got taken off the market after AIDS became all the rage in, the gay community of San Francisco and beyond. That was a phenyl, I forget the actual name of that drug, but it was not an amphetamine. But back in the good old days in the 50s, no, they were pure on amphetamines, what diet pills were. So Bill Gaines is sitting there. He's been fretting over this thing forever. He thinks he's going to lose his company. He thinks they're going to come down, drop censorship on everything. So he comes in hopped up on diet pills and gives testimony. And he gets maneuvered like you cannot possibly believe in terms of the whole thing. Let me see if I can find there's a little bit of a transcript. I gotta find this because it's just too awesome. I found it, by the way, some of the sources for these are, you can take DC Visit of the Capitol and you can take essentially a virtual tour of some of the exhibits from DC, and one of them was the actual comic that I'll be talking about in a moment. I'm sorry, it's going to be a little hard for me to locate and keep the show rolling, but basically, Gaines is sitting there, and he starts out giving a really good defense of free speech. He says, look, I think my readers are much smarter than you think they are. You think they're little children. I think that they're smart people and they can make moral decisions and that they know how to weigh, good guys and bad guys, and that they can, that I'm trusting them with much more adult content than you're trusting them with. You think it all to be fluffy bunnies and whatever. But no, I think my readers are smart. And then the guy says, well, is there nothing you would not show, you would not, show, a child in these things? He says, well, not within the bounds of good taste, no. And at that point, they spring the trap. The trap looks like this. Let me go to the still. Where are you, baby? Oh, come on. Oh, there we are. Okay. Oh, sorry. So this is, I want to show the picture, first of all, of Gaines testifying. And if you can see the board behind him, they've got all the exhibits of the different crime comic books at the day that that Wertham had just gotten done. Had just gotten done showing off of examples of the horrors of comic books. So they just ask him, is there nothing that within the bounds of good taste that you would not show? And they say, this is one of your comics, isn't it? And they're showing, the axe murderer, the severed head, the body in the background, the blood dripping out of the mouth. And they say, how is this possibly in good taste? He said, well, yeah, I think it's in good taste. And they say, well, how could it possibly be worse? And Gaines apparently had an earlier version of this cover, which he said, you showed a little bit too much of the entrails coming off the neck there. Could we clean that part up a little bit and just show the angle slightly higher so you're not seeing as much of the exposed tendons of the neck? And I also noticed that Marie Severin, one of the earliest women in comics, who is the colorist of EC Comics, had done what she could to mute down some of the color of the blood dripping out of the mouth there, to take down the horror level ever so slightly. But yeah, let's just say the testimony did not go super well for him. So they got done with this whole deal, and it was absolute slaughter for the comic companies. People like Archie Comics and National Publications had walked out of the thing, saying, look, we will be clean corporate citizens. We will form an industry organization to keep this whole thing from getting out of hand. You don't need to censor us. Really, Mr. Senator, we'll take care of it. And they got together along with Bill Gaines, because Bill said, all right, fine, we'll form an organization. We'll get these guys off of our backs. And they formed an organization called the Comic Magazine. Let me find it. Oh, good grief. The Comics Magazine Association of America, CMAA. We know this as comic collectors. We know this from the Comics Code Authority, CCA. Now, Gaines had originally thought, let's go ahead and make this a PR stunt. They will self-police. You don't need to have a censorship role on the whole thing. But the other publishers were like, oh, hell with that. We're going to absolutely make this into a censorship body. And they had a judge named Charles Murphy wound up being the head of the whole thing. It wound up being a very censorious body that really threw the book at things. As a matter of fact, because Gaines refused to join the organization after forming it, he said, wait, I just thought this was going to be a front. Because he refused to join afterwards, they said, okay, everyone else gets to have the assistant censors look over their work, but Gaines, all your EC comics go straight to Judge Charles Murphy to have to be evaluated as to whether they conform with the code. So the Comics Code, when it started out, and this is the stamp that went on anything that was approved by the Comics Code. It was, and honestly, it got to be a point where you had to have that stamp on your book, or you would have a very difficult time finding distribution. So the Comics Code, when it started out, was much, much stricter than the comic code that we all probably grew up with later on. So if you grew up in the 60s and 70s like I did, you could see monsters. I grew up on Tomb of Dracula and so forth. Well, none of those things could have happened prior to the 1972 revision of the comics code. I want to say it's 72, it might have been 71. Anyway, and by the way, if you notice that in the early 70s there was an explosion of Marvel monster titles, it's purely due to the fact that they revised the comic code to suddenly allow some of the things that were banned before, and Marvel could suddenly, take a bunch of things out of inventory that they'd been sitting on since the 50s, as well as hire new people to write new stories in the monster genres in the whole thing. So that's why you saw the Marvel monster titles come out at that point. But anyway, in the original version of the comics code, I'll just read some of it for you. Number 1, crimes must never be presented in such a way as to create sympathy for the criminal, to promote distrust of the forces of law and justice, or to inspire others with a desire to imitate criminals. So no really clever heist capers for you. No comic shall explicitly present the unique details and methods of a crime. There we go again. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority. If a crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity. So no gun malls and gangsters living the good life, and well, honestly, you couldn't make any modern movie picture at this point. Criminals shall not be presented as to be rendered glamorous or to occupy a position which creates a desire for emulation. In every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal punished for his misdeeds. Scenes of excessive violence shall be prohibited. Blah de blah de blah de blah. With crime, the letters of the word crime on a comics magazine shall never be appreciably greater in dimension than the other words contained in the title. The word crime shall never appear alone on a cover. Restraint in the use of the word crime in titles or subtitles shall be exercised. So kiss goodbye to almost everything Lev Gleason and certainly all the crime comics out of EC. All those literally almost by name were exercised, just with the typography restrictions of those. Crime must pay the penalty, crime detective, and so forth. All of them gone. Crime suspense stories. General Standards Part B, no magazine or comic shall use the word horror or terror in its title. So, I guess that's gone. I guess these are gone. All lurid, unsavory, gruesome illustrations shall be eliminated. Inclusion of stories dealing with evil shall be used or shall be published only with the extent as to illustrate a moral issue, and in no case shall evil be presented luringly, nor as to injure the sensibilities of the reader. I love this particular one. Scenes dealing with or instruments associated with The Walking Dead, torture, vampires, and vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism, and werewolfism are prohibited explicitly by name. And it goes on and on and on, as you can imagine. So, at that point, EC is just up against the bloody wall. Everything that they've been doing that's been selling like hotcakes is shot. They can't publish it anymore. They can never get the comic code seal. Mad is a comic book, decides that they're going to go switch to magazine format, just to get into a different distribution format so they can get away from the comics code seal. They try doing new wasn't new trend, they call it new something else, stories involving things like pirates and even things like psychoanalysis, there was a series on I think there's one called Extra, which was just nothing but crime reporters, cracking the case and stuff like that. Honestly, none of it worked. It was not selling. They were going down the toilet. The writing was definitely on the wall. But one last final parting shot they got on everything was they managed to get Incredible Science Fiction number 33, and this is the one. It was like if we got to go out, let's go out with a bang. They actually republished a story that they had put together earlier called Judgment Day, and let me pull up the graphic on that one. The idea was that it's a sci-fi story where you've got people on different world where there's huge discrimination between the red people and the blue people, the red robots, the blue robots, and it's just absolutely terrible and indescribable. It's absolutely unsupportable and so forth. And the final frame is what got them in trouble. It wasn't. It was the idea that when the person actually takes off his mask at the end of the story, the astronaut who's describing this strange alien world, you reveal that it's a black man. Now, this got thrown over to Judge Charles Murphy over the Comics Code, and he says, no frickin' way, not going to happen. Gaines calls him a nasty name, hangs up the phone on him. In the end, it eventually got communicated that we'll allow you to publish the story if you take the sweat off of him. They, again, said no way, published it anyway, but that was pretty much their swan song. So at the end of the day, and this is also worth pointing out, you remember Ray Bradbury? Sent out a letter to the editor on this one, and I hope you guys can read it. But he basically, amongst the comments for this one, is a letter from Ray Bradbury, saying, "Good job, publishing, a brave story that the world needs to see in this day and age," it was, and so forth. But anyway, that was the end of the party for EC Comics at that point. What lay beyond that was Mad was being edited by a guy named Kurtzman. They switched to a magazine format. He eventually got hired away by a guy named Hugh Hefner for a as yet unnamed magazine for adult sensibilities. And they took half of the Mad staff with them when they went, because it was, at that point, it was, they were circling the drain. Mad, however, survived. It got sold off in the 60s, but and eventually got acquired into the DC empire of things. I forget exactly when, but anyway, but Mad is still going to this day, whereas almost everyone else that they were fighting against did not live on. But it's I like this story a lot. Unfortunately, William Gaines, did not have a particularly happy life. He hung in there. He divorced his second wife that he'd married in '55. That one fell apart. But he married one last time in, I want to say, '87. Died in 1992. I never got to know him personally, which is a real shame. But yeah, the guy got run into the ground. He was responsible for creating, really helping create the environment that allowed some of the best comic books of everything to happen. And I think his ending was really, really quite sad. I think he got the last laugh in a way with Mad, but it's, was it enough? I don't know. Let me do a quick check of the chat here. Cancellation of the New Warriors, but also maybe a new okay. Hated the scene in Halloween with the gravestone murder on the bed. Let's see here. What comics do people reading for Halloween? Just read Sight Unseen. Pagan Holiday. Let's see. Compliment says, is there being any thought of making a version of ComicBase to be hosted on your servers? Even the cover seems maybe it could be a way to get around the program, the 30 gigabytes. We have thought about things like that. I think we'd have to reimagine a lot of the program to say what we're delivering if we made a web-ish version of it. Amongst other things, I mean, you think about things like, just labels, things like that would not be a thing that could probably happen. And certainly the velocity of data entry is nothing like what you could do on your own personal stuff. One thing that we do worry about when we talk about doing a web version of ComicBase is really shifting the emphasis on the ownership of the data. Where if you have a web version of the app, then basically we own your data. It comes down to it basically as soon as you stop paying us whatever fee we're charging for the whole thing, you lose access to your own stuff. And I don't know that I love that idea. So I'm not saying it's impossible. It might not honestly be the only way to support some platforms in the future, but it's not something we're jumping into immediately. Harryhausen is the bestest. Let's see here. Server crashes scare you. Yes, they do. Okay, some other things. EC Books. Ray Bradbury story. Speaking of Warren is now. Oh, Warren is now suing Warrant over their magazine creeps. Huh. Interesting. Wertham was a quack. Wertham was a quack. Honestly, I really wish that Seduction of the Innocent, that book I showed you, I really, really wish that that was available in some kind of EPUB form. Maybe someone's pirated it by now. But one thing I had definitely looked into was contacting his estate and seeing if I could buy up the digital rights to it so that it could be republished, even just as a service to the public domain. Because it's such an important book for comics history, and at the same time, it's such a great example of how to lie with statistics. It's an absolute textbook on it. It's very sloppy reasoning. You're saying a lot of things that emotionally sound quite true, but are absolutely insupportable with data. It's a lot of use of anecdote in place of data, and so yeah, it's a problem. Kids obsessed with sex turned to crime. Perfect description of kids in 2020, says Gregory. I just got here. What I miss? Yes, I have a copy for several years. Would still like to find one with the bibliography. Yeah, I have the little photostated bibliography in the back. Came with my copy. Yeah, it's a hard book. On the other hand, I would be happy if you contact me to send you a copy of the bibliography sheet that I've got. So if that helps you. Really, the last two-leaf bibliographies. Yep. Okay. Aura found one. Okay. Playboy's Little Annie Fanny. By the way, if you're wondering why was Playboy in ComicBase, period, it was so that we could have Will Elder and Kurtzman's contributions noted. Because if you're doing a search for Kurtzman, I wanted that to show up. Okay, and horror movies, the nurse and ambulance in the end, because the movie was so scary. What was this? There was, that was a, I'm trying to remember the name of that movie, but it was a publicity stunt for, I want to say, The Birds, possibly Psycho. I want to say it was a Hitchcock one where they made a big deal about like, oh yes, we have medical personnel standing by in case we scare you to death with this one. Might have been The Tingler, but yeah, I do love old hokum from movies. But yeah, so we're running a little bit long here, but I do want to share one last thought on this whole thing. So I said at the beginning, well, all right, Bickford. So what are you scared of? I'm going to go back to 1948 just for a moment. If I can find the image. Oh, that's right. I wouldn't fit in the media library. I loaded my media library up too far with other images, so I need to flip this one out to load in the new one. All right. This is a picture. If I can pull up. All right. Yeah, it's a picture from 1948 of in Bennington. I want to say Bennington. Let me get the right. I've got it right here in Bergen County, Binghamton, New York. This was a mass burning of comic books. In 1948, this was getting to be a thing. This was, they'd be organized by different groups. This particular one was organized, they had youth groups going house to house and basically saying, parents, are there any evil comic books that your children are reading that they should not be reading? Give them to us and we will dispose of them for you. And later on, they had ones where they'd have Cub Scouts even running around doing them. And in one case, the Cub Scout that collected the most comics got to light the pyre. They're describing the comic burning here as having 25-foot tall flames. I believe it. Comic paper burns like you can't believe, as does most such paper. But this is what. 3 years after you defeat the Nazis in World War II, 3 years later, this is what we were doing in our streets here. And this kind of just mass hysteria around the idea that these guys are bad. And, whatever the thing is, it doesn't deserve a voice. I'm going to say there is something that scares me. And the thing that scares me is just unreasoning mobs. If I'm perfectly honest, it's like, there's zombies, right? Zombies are like the horror of the day. And we all know if you want to get rid of a zombie, you shoot him in the head, right? But the whole idea of go back to is like, what would scare you? Period is like you have to be made powerless somehow. And I noticed that, one thing, it's a problem scaring you as an adult is it's hard to make you powerless because, again, it's like you can stand up for yourself now. You don't need to spook. You've got your own rights. You can get a gun. You can shoot back at someone who's trying to hurt you. So, I love Dean Koontz books, for instance, that, I might have said this already, I certainly was thinking it, that one of the things he does beautifully is he answers the question of, like, well, okay, if I'm going to hurt my heroes, I'm going to give them guns first, and I'm going to prove why the guns don't help. Right? It isn't like morally they don't help. It's just like, no, there's something about their situation where the gun and the police, the two things that most adults would look to, can't get you out of whatever scrape this is and why it's still morally dangerous to you. But I feel like that's like the table stakes to be scary to an adult in the year 2020 is why is it the obvious methods of force that are at our disposal to defend ourselves are no good? How is the monsters going to get around that? Now, the monsters can sneak up on you, right? I mean, so if it just drops from the ceiling or it's invisible or things like that, yeah, you can certainly startle people. To quote the old Ministry album, it's like, I think startles, did I frighten you? No, I think startle is a better word. Startle is one thing, that's the jump scare, right? But jump scare isn't the same as dread and terror. What gives me dread and terror, if I'm just honest about it, is the idea of being confronted with just an unreasoning mob that is determined to, take my voice away, take away everything I know and love, lay waste everything around me, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it. The obvious things I could do to fight back, I can't shoot them. They're my fellow people. The police are somehow standing down or they're powerless. And if the mob can just do its thing, I gotta say, that gets under my skin. And so, yeah, that's the thing I would like to see not have happen in the real world. I think the good news is, in the real world, if you're in a position of authority, if you are the police, there's a way, just like, if you want to stop a bunch of zombies, there is a way to do it. You shoot them in the head, right, until, you hope that there aren't a million of them. Well, one thing about mob is if you stop the mob before, as it gets going, you don't need to stop the tidal wave. If the first 3 guys who throw a rock get arrested on the site and carried off, it ends. If the next 3 guys throw a rock, the whole thing de-escalates very quickly if there's effective action right away. Same thing goes, I see all this absolute chaos on college campuses, and I say, like, when am I going to see a single school administrator say, guys, the next time I see any of you guys break in anything, you're not students here anymore. If that happened one time, you would end everything instantly. But yeah, no, the funny thing about like I say, mobs, and the things that really scare me is really at the end of the day, it's like realizing the enemy is within ourselves. It's the thing I think Stan Lee meant to get at with the Hulk, is the idea that, it's that rage that takes over and turns you into someone else, is that there is something kind of primal and frightening about the idea that, it's built into the beast. It's, every single one of us has got that in us to become someone who's just horrible. The Hulk doesn't play it for terror. I mean, I think the first couple issues try to, and from time to time they try it, but the problem is he gets too established in the 70s as kind of a fundamentally cuddly guy, and so he doesn't scare you as much anymore. But I do think, anyone who's ever been really, really angry with someone they love, there's the part where, like, it feels like they've just pushed you and pushed you and pushed you, and there's some part of your brain that just ticks over and says, oh man, it's on now. And the thing that's scary about that is it's almost like a drug. It's like nothing feels better in your head than righteous fury. I mean, it feels, not only does it feel like just liberating, like, I'm full of power because I'm going to really give it to this person, but you feel like you're just doing the Lord's work while you're doing it. You feel absolutely sanctimonious, while you're doing it. I mean, you're sanctified while you're doing it. It feels great. And that's why, one of the smartest things I ever heard was that, rage is, anger is really like, it's the devil's cocaine. It feels terrific. And when the rage passes, when the mob moves on, when you look at what you've just done, when you were screaming at a loved one or whatever else, even if they really had it coming, you look there and just look at the wreckage and say, oh my God, Jesus, what did I do? So that's I think the cool part. That's the one that scares me. It's the monster in ourselves, it's the monster, on our streets, and it's the whole thing that, when we say that when we lose the idea that, like, there's a step, no matter how mad I am, that I'm not going beyond this, because if I do that, I'm not myself anymore. When we lose that whole idea, then we can turn into the monster. And that's my little Halloween thought for the day. Guys, thanks for hanging in, and I'll see you next time, and we'll talk about something else. Stay safe till